the gospel of the Lord.
In the English language, the possessive is expressed in two ways. For example, we can say the son of John or John's son. But it seems still to use the of son variation in our everyday English. It sounds like something that might have been used in biblical times and even in the 18th and 19th century, but not now. So it seems odd to me that in our times we would continue to refer to heaven as the kingdom of heaven. I like heaven's kingdom better. It seems to refocus the emphasis not to something out there, up there, but towards something that the heavenly would expect of the earthly, something God would expect of us on earth. Today is the third of three parables or allegories or stories about what is heaven's kingdom, what is God's kingdom, perhaps even God's kingdom, and what that might look like. In today's gospel story, Jesus is the storyteller. The audience, the targeted audience, are the Pharisees, who are the elders of the temple. It seems that they are trying to discredit John the Baptist and Jesus, trying to discredit them so that people will think John did not, and Jesus does not, have the authority to speak out as prophets. But Jesus, as is his style, tells stories that pointedly show that John did, and he himself does, have the authority, and that they, the Pharisees, have muffed their opportunity to speak for God in God's kingdom. 3 weeks ago, we heard Jesus' story of the father who asked his two sons to go to work in the vineyard for the day. For Matthew's audience of the first century, and by transference to us, vineyard is a metaphor for Israel, the historic people or family kin of God, that is, the Jews. In this story, one of the sons answered his father with yes, but then didn't go to work in the vineyard. In contrast, the second son said no, but then did go. Jesus asked the Pharisees, which of the two did the will of the Father? These elders answered with what they thought would be a safe answer for them. It was the son who actually went and worked. But Jesus points out to the elders that they themselves were like the son who said yes and then didn't work. These Pharisees were savvy enough to understand what Jesus was telling them. They were obeying, saying yes to the letter of the Mosaic law, but they were not making God's kingdom a better place. So their answer to going to work in their vineyard was really a no. However, it was the tax collectors and prostitutes who surely had said no to God at first, but now would be a part of God's kingdom because of their change of heart to come to the vineyard to work. John and Jesus came to show a new way of being heaven's kingdom. The Pharisees thought they couldn't bend to a new way. They weren't in a living vineyard anymore. Then last Sunday, Reverend Krista tackled the next allegory about heaven's kingdom, the one about the vineyard with the fence, the winepress, and the watchtower, a pretty fancy vineyard with all the modern accoutrements. This was the vineyard to which the owner sent his slaves, and then even his son to collect his due, his rent from the grape crop. And these representatives of his, were abused, and the son and some of the slaves even killed for speaking for him. Here again, Jesus was telling the Pharisees that John and he were the legitimate ambassadors from God for heaven's kingdom. They, the Pharisees and the elders, who were the keepers of the vineyard, were given the task to protect the people of Israel had rejected the new leaders who had a new message that God had sent to instruct his people to make it a better place for his children. The result would be that the Pharisees were replaced by new workers in the vineyard, and these new workers would be good to the vineyard and faithful to its owner. Then we come to today's gospel allegory about the king who threw a wedding party for his son. None of the invited chose to come. Some even abused and even killed the messengers who the king sent out to remind them that the wedding feast was on. But they refused to come. So the king used his might to destroy the murderers and their cities. Well, this is an allegory after all, and allegories tend to exaggerate. So then the king sends his servants out to the streets to invite everyone to come to the party. The chosen, the Pharisees, the temple, had refused to listen to God's invitation, an invitation to a new way to think and behave within his kingdom. The invitation, unheeded by the Pharisees or original guests, was now accepted by both good and bad who came to the party off the streets. This is where the new word was being spoken and listened to, first by John the Baptist, now by Jesus. Now, before I go on, I'd like to pause and make a textual clarification. Many times I have been confused by the second part of today's Matthew reading, the paragraph where the king gets enraged by the guest who isn't dressed for the party and has him bound and thrown out into the street. It seems unreasonable to call someone in off the street to a meal and then expect him to be dressed in wedding clothes. This week I discovered something that makes this more understandable. Some biblical scholars believe that this paragraph may originally have been a separate parable dealing with preparedness for the end times, like the parables we'll find in chapters 24 and 25 of Matthew. That is to say, somehow, in all the editing and copying of the text by hand over the centuries before the printing press, this paragraph probably was copied in error to this place of Matthew's version of the gospel. So you can ease your mind about the king or God of the allegory being unreasonable, because the story really ends at the first paragraph with, "So the wedding hall was filled with guests." Now back to the sermon. So here we have it. 3 Sundays, 3 better visions of what God's kingdom is like. It is a place where people really listen to the real word of God the Father. The words spoken in the desert by John and the words spoken by Jesus as he preached and taught in the new kingdom. A new kingdom that is a place where the invited come and are welcomed. A place where they listen so well that they are inspired to add their gifts to this new place called Heaven's Kingdom. I believe that I gave a sermon a while back where I defined sin as a breaking of relationship. This is relationship modeled on the covenant between God and humankind with humankind. About a month ago, I did a number on the relationship between myself and my one older sibling, my brother John. John, an MBA, worked hard as a corporate manager and then as a small business owner. John did vote and will again vote for Mr. Trump because John believes Mr. Trump represents what a stronger America can be. I, however, have a great deal of trouble understanding Mr. Trump's vision of a stronger America. And during our phone conversation, I became too adamant in my position. I regretted it as soon as I hung up, but the damage was done. I have talked with John since, but I've never had the courage to speak of politics again. So I've decided that it is time for Laurie Moyer to grow up and learn how to engage in graceful conversation with people who have another perspective than my own. I have to learn how to ask more meaningful, that is to say, not demeaning questions. Questions that are open-ended. Questions that are meant to really find out what the other is thinking and why he or she has come to that position. I want to enter into conversations with others who are interested in why I have chosen my position and what in my life has brought me to think that my choice is better than the alternative. And, for instance, why is it that John and I, who until the age of 5 when he went off to kindergarten, grew up almost as twins, and yet we are so different politically? Also, I want to talk to someone who is on the other side of an issue and share with him and her that on some things my position is not so unbudgeable as others who hold a similar view. It is time for me to be completely honest and open and curious. It is time for me to be one of those who were out on the street and were called into the feast at the invitation of the King, so that I can talk and discuss and enjoy the people of God who inhabit heaven's kingdom here now. I don't want to be left out. And I have that opportunity to learn this kind of discussion skill soon. And you also are invited to learn a new life skill of listening to and discussing topics of discomfort. More information will be coming your way shortly, but I want to personally invite you to take advantage of these opportunities to get some training, to practice new skills around building today's heavenly kingdom, to help make our world a beloved community. I do not expect that I will be perfect at these skills from the start, or probably ever for that matter. But I am determined to have better skills when I talk to John, whether before or after the current election. And if some of you are willing to engage in conversation, I would welcome conversation with you too. I think this is essential right now. It is sinful for me to act like a Pharisee, to act so dogmatic and not so loving. It is imperative for me to put some reinforcement tape on the relationship I cracked with my brother John. So, as the first step towards a better kingdom, I'm going to take a baby step tomorrow by virtually attending a series of short pieces by Ray Suarez, former PBS NewsHour host, journalist, and author, and come to find out, lifelong Episcopalian. The series is called Civil Conversation in Uncivil Times. It is free for 2 weeks, 24 hours a day. The listening time comes to about 45 minutes. There are other opportunities coming shortly as well. Emily Hopkins, who many of you know from St. Paul's, and Reverend Krista are working to bring this and other opportunities for learning to us. We will let you know. In addition to civil conversation, I intend to be part of training with an online group called Braver Angels that even provides materials for learning, listening, and practicing. Grace Church Martinez has invited us to join them as we find out together how the Braver Angels program can benefit us. I'm old. Not as many years as some of you, I know, but no spring chicken either. I don't want to take online classes with all the other Zoom meetings I'm doing these days. But this is the way it is. Our country is divided on some very serious issues that need to be talked about openly. The election and its acceptance, Black Lives Matter and policing, global warming, and the response to COVID-19, and the freedom of not wearing a mask. These are just for starters. We can no longer just avoid these subjects. There are ways now that are available to help make us better citizens of today's heavenly kingdom. We can come to the table together. Please, please don't miss the bell for this important feast. You are going to want to be part of this emerging kingdom, God's kingdom, right here where we live. Amen.